Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Hamilton dos Santos. I am the Director General of Aberje, which is the Brazilian Association for Business Communication. I would like to welcome you to another episode of the international webinar series, Brazil and the United Kingdom, Dialogues and Narratives. Today, we will explore the topic of COP26 and the challenge, goals, and actions which will be presented, discussed, and debated during the United Nations conference in Glasgow, Scotland in November. And together with our partner, the King's Brazil Institute, today we will discuss the issue from the point of view of strategic communication and the relations between our two countries. I would especially like to thank Professor Vinicius Mariano Carvalho, director of the King's Brazil Institute, who will lead the discussion today all together with the researcher Sebastian Ronderos, who is also an Aberje collaborator. Thank you very much for both. We are also joined by Cristiano Teixeira. Cristiano is CEO of Klabin, one of the biggest companies in Brazil, a company associated with Aberje. And Klabin has an extraordinary commitment with this subject of sustainability and ESG. Thank you very much, Cristiano, for joining us. Thank you very much, really, indeed. We also with us, Kat Thorne, Director of Sustainability at King's College, London, and Julian Reinekel, Professor of International Management and Sustainability at King's College London Business School. Thank you, Julian and Kat, joining us this morning. I also would like to give a special thanks to our supporters, the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain, the British Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Brazil, a Câmara Brasileira de Comércio, a Câmara Britânica de Comércio e Indústria no Brasil, the Canning House, the magazine Problemas Brasileiros, Brazil Problems, if I may translate in English, and the platform Brazil. Well, without any further ado, I will turn the floor over to Professor Vinicius and wish all you a very good seminar. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. Vinicius, it's with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamilton, for this introduction. And again, welcome all to this blended webinars that we established together with Aberje in the beginning of this year, 2021. It's a great honor for us to be here today, starting the second round of this blended webinars that we had the first one in the first semester of this year, and especially with such a fantastic group of people that will be discussing an issue that is extremely relevant for us today in the world in general, and especially for Brazil and UK, due to first Brazilian position globally in terms of climate change, environment, and issues related to climate, and UK, especially also because we will be hosting here this year the COP26. I'm very pleased to be in the company of Sebastian, Cristiano Teixeira, Kat, and Julian, my co-fellows here from King's College London. It's good to be with friends from here as well. And I would like to thank Victor and Danielle, both from Aberje and Brazil Institute, who put together, make a lot of efforts to make this happen again. I think we should start going directly to the questions that we received, and they were quite a lot and quite rich. And so I will kick the ball to start this conversation with you today. And I would go for the first question that came exactly from the revista Problemas Brasileiros. Hamilton, I probably would translate that as Brazilian issues instead of problems, because if it will give the impression that we are so problematic. So let's get to the Brazilian issues, revista Problemas Brasileiros. And I'll start with a question for Kat. Kat, the question that Eduardo Ribeiro put was, in your view, what are the most important elements that need to come together to deliver a successful COP26?
Thank you. I mean, I think firstly, what is success? And I think we have that issue, don't we, of if only words put out the fires and, diverted the floods that, are going to ever increase. But I mean, I think the key has to be, whatever it does enable, is keeping this 1.5 degrees, within reach. So obviously the UK, as a host, has sort of asked for attendees to kind of submit more ambitious emissions reductions targets for 2030. And obviously many of those are in kind of prior to that, but they're still awaiting some. They obviously want to drive action. And the key thing is raising the contributions for climate adaptation and mitigation funds as well. And also really finalising the rules which would govern the implementation of the original Paris Climate Agreement from 2015. So I think obviously there's so much work that goes on prior to COP, and I'm definitely not an expert on COP, but it's been quite interesting, I think, being in the UK and being a bit more aware of what does go on, and how obviously the person from the UK goes around and tries, as I say, to get countries to up their agreements effectively. And obviously it's a huge challenge where, for instance, China being the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter is a key one, and their engagement, and will be one of the biggest determinants, for instance, of the summit's success. So, there's obviously significant rifts remaining between sort of China and some countries, and that argument as well that China has, in terms of wealthier countries, have a greater responsibility to tackle climate change, and what does that look like, and how can that be dealt with? So yeah, I think an interesting one. You've obviously got lots of people coming, and I think speaking to colleagues, there's a lot of people from different businesses going. It's not just politicians. I think we're definitely in a different phase. I mean, effectively, the science hasn't changed. It's just got more urgent. I think there's a particular focus on, for instance, consigning coal to history. So that would be a key kind of factor in terms of success. But I think what you really want to see is that ambition raised, because obviously businesses and organizations, we can have our own ambition, but it helps us if our own governments, are pushing on that and are creating policies behind the scene. And I think for me, the sort of final point in, what is success as well, it's making sure, that it's safe. Obviously, we're in a world of COVID, but that it's truly inclusive, and it gives an opportunity to elevate that sort of diversity of voices.
Thank you. I think the point that you made about inclusivity, it's a good driving for the next question from Eduardo Ribeiro, again, from the Problemas Brasileiros, to Juliane. How do you currently see the situation of climate protection in developing and emerging countries? Do you think we are getting dangerously close to when we might be out of time?
Thanks a lot for this question. So, let's just reestablish the facts. So in 2008, the UN IPCC report said that we had 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe. So that means now we have 9 years. So in terms of human history, we're basically on a razor edge. The newest report, the 2021 IPCC report, just reconfirms this. The impacts are accelerating, and unless there are really immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions, then the target that has been agreed in Paris a few years ago, in 2005, to limit warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius will be beyond reach. But dangerously close, the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed. So in some countries, in some places, we are already there. We already see how human-induced climate change is affecting many weather and climate extremes across the globe. So I think one example, inhaling highly polluted air that already causes almost 1 million people to die prematurely every year. So I think we are, we're not only close, we're almost already there. In some places we are there. And so I think the protection that is in place is just totally inadequate given the challenge that we're facing. And so I think it's a tremendous challenge that the negotiators at COP are facing to really get some agreements. So I think we know where we want to go and what we want to reach, but how to do this, and also, as Kat said, to do this on a basis of with fairness and inclusivity in mind, where the most vulnerable countries, they also tend to be the poorer countries, and how are we going to balance the responsibility of mitigating climate change? I think that is a major challenge, and I think it just I think we're almost there. We're on a razor edge.
Thanks, Juliane. And I go with a question now to Cristiano, and this again in a sort of continuation, and again a question by Eduardo Ribeiro. Cristiano, how does Brazil fit in this scenario?
Okay, that's the easy one. Thank you, Professor Vinicius. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Juliane. It's a pleasure to be with you. As the introduction, I think you have got the information of each one of us. I'm a CEO, I'm an executive of a company. So I normally, when I go to emissions discussion, or what would be the Brazilian, let's say, challenge during this, let's say, difficult time that we have ahead, like Juliane brought to us, I unfortunately needs to be a bit pessimist, but never give up. But what we are doing, just to bring the real, let's say, real life. I mean, in spite of everyone here lives in the same world, but talking about production, delivering, buying, consuming energy every day in a company where I have to sell, make profit, and then reinvest, etc. What we see, in spite of being positive in carbon balance, that means we plant a tree of pinus or eucalyptus, we call short and long fiber, and then we preserve, as we have a very strict legislation in Brazil for when you operate on the land, you have to keep, at least, it depends of the area, the biome you are, but you have to keep it from 25 to 80% of the area that you are the owner. But despite of being positive in carbon balance, that means we stock, we keep more carbon than we emit on our operations. We are kind of leading and participating as a business leader on COP26, this Race to Zero campaign. So I have been travel every 15 days, every 2 weeks to Brasilia, talk to authorities, talking directly to the negotiators, the official negotiators who goes to COP26, trying to, let's say, not only mobilize the private sector, but also bring some influence to the authorities to fight what we have to do, let's say, what the world expects from us. So Brazil needs to stop, as we know, the illegal deforestation in Amazon. Just to remember, we are 3% of the greenhouse gases emissions in the world, but close to 50% of that is the illegal deforestation of Amazon. But this is what we have to do. I mean, use the authorities, the official forces to stop the illegal operation, like the one that we hear from that we know from the Amazon. But I have to remember, and probably now it will explain my pessimism at the beginning of my speech here. Even if we do that immediately, even if we stop the illegal deforestation right now, we have to remember that the most important thing now is to stop to use coal, oil, and natural gas. This is the most difficult part. If you have been watching TV, you see what is happening on energy crisis in China. The government, they are trying to convince the companies to reduce their use of coal, and just this announcement brought us to energy crisis. And what's going to happen in north of Europe in the next winter, for example, in Germany, it depends on the natural gas from Russia. So I just want to bring this utopia that we are not going to give up, never. But Brazil needs to stop the deforestation right now, the illegal deforestation right now. But it's not enough. It's not even close to enough. We have to do much more.
Thanks, Cristiano. I will leave now to Sebastian.
Hello, everyone. Sebastian Ronderos here, researcher at the University of Essex and collaborator of Aberje. And I would like us now to move on to questions of governance and sustainability. And I have a few questions from Guilherme Baroli, which is the content director of the platform Brasil. And the first question will be to Julianne. It starts with a statement and then asks the question, so I'm just going to read it as it is, which goes as: governments cannot on their own deliver the massive change that is needed. What's your message to businesses to lead the way by setting their own net zero targets and joining calls for action?
Yes, thank you. So we know that collectively we want to secure net zero by 2050 to keep within 1.5 degree of warming, and by that means within less than 10 years, global carbon emission must be cut in half to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So that is an enormous ambition, and the climate science is dangerously accurate. So the predictions that we have, they're probably going to come true. And so the different scenarios based on the different emission levels that we have. So I think on one level, it's in everybody's and also in companies' self-interest to start mitigating climate change, because to avoid the worst effects from happening. But it's a challenging situation because it's a bit of a collective action problem as well. It's a social dilemma where we would all be better off if everybody did this, but no one really has the incentive unless everybody else joins in. And that's why it's so important that we have a level playing field, and that we have a global framework, and that governments really kind of set the incentives and set the framework within this action can happen. So I think to demand this, I think also of individual consumers, of individual business, it's very hard unless there's kind of a collective framework for doing so, and unless everybody joins in the action. Can't just fall on like any individual actor, be it a consumer, be it a business. Nevertheless, there is an argument for why still it's individually beneficial to do so, because one is preparedness if legislation is coming, and it will be coming, to be a leader rather than a laggard. But the bigger argument that I think is there, that it forces companies to be innovative. And that is an argument that comes from research that has been developed by Wolfgang Strick on the concept of beneficial constraints, and was originally applied to labor market regulation. And the argument was that the high-skilled productivity growth path in countries like Germany or Japan has actually been based on beneficial constraints imposed on business and operations, which lead to superior economic performance, because businesses that face relatively high costs, they cannot afford to be unproductive, they cannot afford not to be innovative. And so these beneficial constraints could also lead to a source of innovation, which then means that a business who has innovated in that direction will be a leader in the field. So I think that's, despite the collective action dilemma, I think that would be an incentive for any businesses to take this part and innovate.
Very interesting. So it seems that from a rational choice perspective, net zero makes sense as well. And now then, very connected to this point, I would like to ask to Kat, this also from Guilherme Baroli, how is the COP26 likely to affect the ongoing focus on ESG by companies and investors? Do we see the trend of ESG investment continuing at the same pace in the next year?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I mean, I think, will COP26 affect it or not? I mean, I think, I can only speak from the sort of UK's perspective, and it's obviously very prevalent because it's happening here. So it really, it's not in people's faces, but it's very visible. And and we've also had obviously various kind of severe flooding events going on, and there's various things going on in the background that's just sort of raising awareness more in general. So whether it's COP26 or not, I'm not sure, but ESG in general, certainly in the UK, I mean, we're seeing that businesses not taking this seriously, they're beginning to lose customers, employees, and potentially even financing. So I think it's sort of becoming not a choice, is it? And so you've got, your leaders, as mentioned, and you still do have those laggards, and we're always going to have those laggards, and maybe they'll become, unviable unless they do catch up. But I mean, I think in terms of the trend of ESG investment, I mean, I think, yes, continuing at the same pace, but actually accelerating, from what I can see, again, the conversations I have with colleagues who work in sustainability in, organizations that traditionally would not be looking at these sorts of issues, and it would be a really tough sell being at, the board level and having these discussions. Actually, those discussions are happening. It really is. There's still a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but there's an absolute tide of change, as I say, and I think that will only speed up. So King's College as a university actually, went for financing this year, and I think they were very surprised we went along the kind of social and green bond route, and actually, there's an amazing interest rate, and so you can see as people are understanding, that this is a new way of doing business, and actually you will need to join in, as I say, otherwise your business potentially becomes, unviable in the future. The speed at which that happens, will depend obviously on your organization. But I think, as Juliana mentioned, there are other benefits that come from it, as you innovate, you develop new products, and it's actually an opportunity for people.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kat. And let us now locate Brazil in this question. And now from Judy Ferreira of eComunica, she asked, what is the main challenges of ESG that Brazilian companies face today and can face in the future? This one for Cristiano.
Thank you for the question. I just want to go back to Kathy to tell her that on 92, you are probably having the same experience that we had in Brazil in 92, when we had what we call Rio Conference or Eco 92. And I was 19 by that time, so I remember everything. And that was a very important moment for, the mood of Brazil was really good on that. And if you go to some registers by that time, Brazil was an example of reduction on illegal deforestation by that time. So the whole mood of the country was good. The young teenagers coming to not the whole society, but the young people coming to the idea of this Rio conference was very good for the country. So I just want to mention that UK is playing in a very good sense, probably the best or the first in investment in wind, and I think UK is the right country to have the COP26 now. So regarding the question, just to want to everyone knows, but going to ESG governance depends on each company. Company has different levels of governance, so I'm not going to go deeply on that. I'm going to keep on social and of course environment. And what is important and the challenges for the Brazilian companies today is if you are public, for example, if your company is public, you have no choice. I mean, the investors obligates you. I mean, I'm going directly to the speech that we have to do to public companies. If you are public, if you want money from the, if you need your equity, you have to abide the ES and S. That's definitely so. No discussion about it. So you have to support the local community from around your operation. You have to participate on Race to Zero campaign. You have to support TCFD. So you have to do everything that a public company needs to do. Otherwise, you don't get money to invest in your company. So probably the challenge will be for small and medium-sized companies, which are not public. And this is not only for Brazil, but to the whole development world, where these companies needs needs help. So just to remember, the finance of $100 billion per year until 2025, it has to come to medium and small companies and the local communities around the forest, around the areas that depends on finance, but finance is more like a help than a debt. So big companies, yes, ESG it's a must. I mean, you have no way to do differently. The challenge of everyone here is medium and small companies.
Thank you very much for that, Cristiano. And I think Brazil assumes a very interesting role in this context. So maybe we can take a detour and focus a bit more in Brazil. I would invite Vinicius to continue with this set of questions.
Thanks. Cristiano, we will continue with you. And I think it's quite interesting that you mentioned about 1992 and the national mood that we had in Brazil at that time. And the next question, it's quite connected to that, but in a very different way. It's a question by Lucas Mota, editor of the same magazine, Problemas Brasileiros. He has actually two questions. And the first one in particular, what are your expectations for Brazil to assume an environmental leadership, considering the image of climate pariah nurtured throughout the last 2 years due to the successive increases in deforestation? And as continuation in the same questions, he also asked, regardless of what governments decide, will the business sector continue with the low carbon economy agenda? And how does clubbing position itself in the present scenario, consider the race to align itself with ESG practices and also deal with the effects of the COVID pandemic? So, Cristiano, lots of questions for you there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. First, I used to say that let's say the government that it's there now, it's elected by, I mean, it's here in Brazil. I mean, the president of Brazil, who was elected by the democratic system, he's representing with his team the country on COP26. And if you go to what he says in official agenda, and not on social media or let's say other ways that he likes to communicate. But in an official position, he went to US to that important meeting on called by Joe Biden, and he said that Brazil will anticipate from 2060 to 2050. He said that the illegal deforestation will be zero in 2030. So if you go to official announcements, let's say it's not what we want, but it's better than probably what we can see on advertisements, bad advertisements about them. So my point is, we did the job 20 years ago, a bit more, when we reduced the illegal deforestation. We know how to do. We have capacity to reduce that. We are cutting or burning or deforesting about 10,000 kilometers per year. It's something like Lebanon. So we cut 1 Lebanon in illegal deforestation per year in Amazonia. And if you take the plans, what they showed us, the government, what they showed us, what they will do, they will reduce next year, that means 2022, about in July, to 7,000, and then 5 in 2023. So that means cutting 50% of the illegal deforestation from now to in 2 years. So it seems like we can do it before 2030, and this is a political, let's say, interest that they have to reinforce every day on local communities, not the community by itself, but the authorities on Amazon, Bioma, etc. So, saying that, the Brazilian state, so not the Brazilian government, which is now, but the Brazilian state, who is dealing with climate and sustainability for 30, 40 years, I think we are in a good position, the state, what we have done through 40 years. Right now, we have let's say, a situation where let's say, what we say sometimes doesn't meet what the demands of the people, of the general society. But I think we will force the community, the global community will, let's say, bring them, for those who doesn't believe in sustainability and what we need to do, we will force them to react to the reality in a good sense or in a bad sense.
Thank you very much, Cristiano. I would like to bring these questions related to sustainability and development now back to Kat and Julianne. And I would like to bring a question from Madison Greenhalgh of King's College London. This one is for Kat. How do we engage multinational corporations in environmental responsibility when doing so would likely result in a massive overhaul of their operations and at face value appear too expensive of a challenge? Do you agree with this?
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think, how do we engage? I mean, for me, an average multinational corporation is already having this conversation. I'm sure Cristiano would agree with that as well. It's not something that you can not be discussing at the moment. I mean, I think the challenge is probably what we still need, or the environment needs, is that it's sped up, and that's where it gets difficult. That's then the costly bit, and the sort of the mention of the overhaul. where businesses have been doing this for a long time, they've been adjusting their supply chains and they're looking for different ways of doing things, then it's not such a massive overhaul. I mean, I think there's still probably plenty of companies who, things like reducing plastics is sort of something that people are working on, but something that, does have to change, and we're going to have to get more of a sort of, again, you have to have your sort of leaders who, are bold, make those changes, and then other people will follow. It's, as I say, I think it's interesting that too expensive, in some ways, yes, but of course, companies who are truly having this discussion and are understanding, and it's different for all organizations, but I mean, even Kings, we have a lot of buildings. We know that there is a huge cost, particularly around heat decarbonisation, because obviously the UK, we need to heat our buildings, particularly, not just cool them. And, at the moment that's gas, and we've got, the UK being a bit slow. Are we going to move to hydrogen or not? And what do we do? And, lots of questions around that. And it can be difficult sometimes trying to be a leader because all the answers aren't there, and it can look more expensive if you are trying to sort of lead the pack. But I think it's about having the confidence as an organization to kind of work in partnership with others, really understand your business. Again, like we said before, there's often opportunities that come out of it. Most organizations can talk about savings that they've also made because they've reduced waste. They've increased sales because, consumers like the products. So I think in terms of engagement, for me, a lot of it is already happening, but the more people understand the challenges, I think there's a huge thing around still, call it carbon literacy, improving, as all of us as citizens, understanding that, so people have the confidence to be able to talk about it and truly understand it. But yeah, for me, I think there's a lot of engagement going on. It's how do we speed it up for me.
Thank you, Kat. From your speech and Christiana's, it seems that there's a sort of challenge in between discourses and actions. And in this sense, I would like to bring the question from Rita Gicassia for Julianne, that goes as, how might one transform the international community devoted climate change discourse into reality, obtaining the necessary resources and partnerships to leverage the bioeconomy in the Amazon as a way to produce and conserve?
Yes, thank you. I think the example of the Amazon and the bioeconomy is just such a pertinent example, because the consequences of climate change and also the
So we lost Julianne for a while. So perhaps what we could do while she reconnects, we have another question here that goes to Kat. Kat, it's a question regarding the COP26 challenge goals and actions. And we go, the questions from Ricardo Pires. He asks, how important is to work on the right culture within a company, from the top management and all the staff stakeholders, to ensure business models and practices are adequately transformed to produce the right environmental as well as societal outcomes?
Yeah, so definitely an important question. I mean, I've been sort of very privileged now to work within different organizations and for different organizations over the sort of the last 20 years. And there's a lot that you can do, just from the top down, and there's a lot you can do from just the bottom up. But unless you've got that culture overall right, you're never going to maximize, the kind of positives that come out of it, and not just try and minimize the negatives. So I think, there's something around understanding what culture already exists within a company, and actually often, how does that then map into, because they could already be very caring about their local communities. And actually, if you've got that, how does that map across into other kind of environmental and kind of social issues? It's obviously never easy, and like with everything, if you don't, so at King's, for instance, there's been a lot of bottom-up support originally. You can imagine we have lots of students, and so we had a huge groundswell of both students and then staff who wanted change and wanted action, and actually that could have a huge impact. But until, you know, over the last couple of years, we're really getting that top-down support. That's when you kind of get that change, and to be honest, still the culture is being created. But I think for me, what I see is it maps onto other areas. I mean, you don't go and work in a university for the money. Maybe some people are nodding on that one. But, you know, there could be, you know, in the pursuit of knowledge. So how do you maximize, you know, the environmental social benefits of that? Or you could care about people and looking after students. And so often I think there's parallels, and if you can kind of tap into, for me, the heart of an organization, you can, as I say, work on that culture and identify, as I say, the kind of joint benefits of doing this, and bring about the change.
Thanks, Kat. And I will continue with you with a question that came from Sabesp, from Adriano Streghini. He's asking, what are your expectations towards a more globally regulated carbon market after COP26?
I think obviously we need, the thing is, for me, the science hasn't changed. So, you know, COP26, and in the UK, whilst if you look at our policies, we're not quite aligned with 1.5, but we're sort of on the 2 degrees bit. So, for instance, in the UK, there's already a lot of legislation kind of coming through and underway. But obviously, we're in a very global world, and, you know, we buy a lot of products, don't we, from abroad in China and places. So, you know, you would expect to see prices potentially increasing or aligning, or but I think it will take time to push through. So yeah, I think they'll probably, you'll feel the effects depending on where you are. As I say, already in the UK, there's a lot, and there's even legislation, you know, things like the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures. Certain countries like ours are already bringing that in, but I'm sure that others will also, you know, so you'll see some ripples maybe where it's already on the horizon for us, but for other people that will be something quite new.
Thanks, Kat, and good to see Julian join us again. Thank you very much, Julian. And I will get a question for you then. Again, by Ricardo Pires. How would you rate the current status of globally defining and measuring right environmental and societal outcomes? What needs to be done to better assess such status?
Yes, first of all, apologies. I don't know what happened. My network connection just went, and so yeah, I'm really sorry. I think this is a really, really good question, because it really goes into the implementation of some of these climate goals. We have a range of alternative measures that are non-economic, such as the World Development Indicators, the World Bank collection of development indicators, or the Human Development Index, which really try to capture a different range of non-economic outcomes. And I think that is a very interesting development within the economic logic, and maybe that's promising if you really want to incorporate some of these measures. I think we really need to start accounting for the value that is created by natural capital, by, for instance, by ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are such like biodiversity, fertile soil, clean water, timber and so on, and how they protect, for instance, against flooding and a range of services deriving from the ecosystem. And I think it's very interesting that there are already some measurements underway that are trying to capture the value of such ecosystem services. So in 1997, the first time someone from, I think it was Portland State University in the UK, started to measure this, the estimate was that the global ecosystem services are twice the value of global GDP. This is incredible. So imagine we would factor in the value, the economic value that is created by nature, by ecosystems, and so on. And I think as long as we see them as free goods, as free resources, like clean air, even though the air is not always clean, or water, there is going to be an underinvestment and underappreciation in these resources. So I think it's incredibly important. I think there's some really interesting developments, as I said, to measure this. But I think we still lack some uniform frameworks and some really ways to do this more systematically. So in the UK, for instance, the pensions regulator just published new guidelines and regulations that ask trustees of occupational pension funds to account for the risks of climate change in order to exercise effective stewardship, because pension savers could miss out if the trustees don't do this. So I think we see efforts of trying to factor in the risks, but also the benefits. And I think that is really, really critical for operationalize the climate goals that we have.
Thank you very much, Juliane. And Cristiano, we have a question to you now, more related exactly to communication. And there's a question by Vânia Matoso, the Centrais Elétricas de Santa Catarina. She's asking how to create internal communication plans to involve employees in environmental causes.
Thank you for that question. Transparency all the time with the team. Honest on your actions. I mean, you have to do what you walk the talk. You have to do what you say. And the first group to involve is always the internal group. Always. We don't do any kind. We don't do any kind of external communication without alignments on an internal group, because I mean, don't go home. Our employee, he cannot go home and watch TV and see a Klabin publication or advertisement, and his feeling is differently. I mean, the company is not what they are showing. So fight greenwashing all the time. So transparency, honesty, and fight greenwash always. Walk the talk, always.
Thank you very much, Cristiano. So now we shall move on to questions. Just a second, sorry. Yeah, regarding climate change and vulnerability. This one is from the British Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Brazil. So I'm going to start with Juliane, then Kat, and then Cristiano. They are closely related. So the first one for Juliane is, what main challenge in the relationship between vulnerable and less vulnerable countries we might face in fighting against climate change?
Yes, let's look into what is a vulnerable country. So the Maldives, for instance, they could disappear by the end of the century if nothing is done. HSBC has done some global analysis and looked into what are the most resilient and the most vulnerable countries. So the most resilient countries are Sweden, France, Finland, Germany, and the US. The most vulnerable are Nigeria, Bangladesh, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, and Tunisia. But this is a myth that there are some countries that are more vulnerable and others that are less vulnerable, because I think this ignores that there are within country vulnerabilities. The German floods were mentioned. It shows that even countries that we think are less vulnerable are highly vulnerable. Plus the COVID, and I think what was mentioned, China and the disruptions to global supply chains that we're seeing now really shows that all countries are vulnerable. So it's a complete myth that there are some less and more vulnerable countries. The World Economic Forum has estimated that by 2050, 80% of people in the world will be affected by climate change. So we are all vulnerable. I think the challenge is that there are some countries that are poorer and they are less able to adapt and to mitigate to climate change. And that I think is a call for climate justice. And I think that is a global movement that has existed for some time, and I think whose voices are getting stronger in policy discourses as well. But ultimately, I think we're all vulnerable. But I think that the question is, how do we get richer countries to help poorer countries to adapt more effectively to climate change? And I think that's where the discussion is need to be had.
Thank you, Julian, and I agree. And this is exactly the question for Kat. So wonderful. It would be then, how can the climate change agenda address the challenges faced by the poorer countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. To Juliana's point, it's about investing, isn't it, in the right things, and often the things that we're going to be investing in will actually improve, vital services and things that people need. So, examples are obviously creating jobs and, improving things like that. But actually, you can, as they've shown, haven't they, if you can put solar power in places where people currently don't have electricity, then actually, suddenly they've got access to light. Children can do their schoolwork, late on. So there's some real basic needs that actually investment can support. But I mean, generally, there's obviously a global health issue. And again, sort of within vulnerable countries, how does it address that? Because climate change is obviously exacerbating a lot of these things. I mean, they're just talking about malaria vaccination, aren't they? It's great news if it happens, but actually, sort of the impact of those are only increasing otherwise. And with climate change, you've obviously got things like sort of supporting farmers, and productivity. If you can improve the soil, which is a key thing that we need to do, to kind of combat kind of climate change. Storing carbon in the soil. Again, that provides benefits to farmers because it's going to be more productive. Obviously, there's a whole, national security issues. So actually, if you can make countries safer because you're now not, you've got access to water, and access to land that is fertile. There's, as I say, there's sort of multiple benefits if we can get that investment right and directed in the right way.
Thank you very much, Kat. So against this background, Cristiano, how can the relationships between Brazil and the United Kingdom move forward after the COP26 summit?
Wow. I just had a meeting this morning where a part of the explanation of the president of COP26, Mr. Alok Sharma, was exactly in the point that you brought. We have to keep the relation between the Brazil and UK. We have to keep working together in the at least on this Race to Zero campaign. We still let me put like this. I'm too practical to be a dreamer. So we still in a very difficult situation to reach the goals that we have to do together, not only UK and Brazil. But we have to move on, to keep saying to keep explaining the campaign of trying to mobilize more companies I say companies because I'm the private side, so I tried my conversation with the private sector. So we will keep trying to mobilize more companies in UK and Brazil to join the campaign. I mean, it's not going to stop in COP26. And actually the next years will be probably the next 10 years. We will see a lot of let's say, tragedies on the planet regarding climate change. And like I said, I'm more too practical to be a dreamer. So I have to go to one speech like this. Poor people dying on the street without food. Even in big cities, in rich countries, you used to see this, or because of crack, drugs, etc., or food, but we don't really take care of it. We see it, we feel it, but we don't do it, and we don't do anything. But if you were there, and I'm not talking only about London, just to bring, or Stockholm, just to bring the cities from my friends here, but São Paulo is about the same. We are there, but we don't feel, we don't touch, we don't see what is happening in very poor areas of the world. In climate, it's different, because what I'm saying is, even if we really don't do anything for people dying without food, when you go to climate, the atmosphere, unless someone proves differently, but in atmosphere, we share the same, right? So like I think Julian said, we all will face the same problem on climate change. So probably because of that, that's why I say I'm not a dreamer. I'm very practical to be a dreamer, but I say people will feel it on their skin in each country, in each big city or rich city of the world will feel it. So maybe, for that reason, I'm more optimist than stopping, for example, the let's say difficulties on helping poor countries. When you go to climate change, it's gonna happen. I mean, there is no chance to be stuck.
Thanks, Cristiano. We are coming close to the end of this conversation, of this dialogue here. And I think your last words, Cristiano, helps a lot us to make a good sense of what we had here and why we did that. I think we could see in all this conversation that we had and all the questions that we received, a need for the understanding that talk about climate change, and especially looking at the challenge that COP26 will be trying to address, it's not talk about some ideals or some empty images or some just advertisement aspects, but it is an existential change that we need to do collectively as humanity. And it's not one country, it's and the other country doesn't need to worry about that. It's not something that we should do in universities, and business and companies don't need to worry about that. It is really something existentially challenging for all of us. And I think when we promote dialogues like this one, we actually are doing our contribution in this existential change, in this very important change that we need to do right now and right here, because the risks are here. The risks are in front of us every day, more and more evident. So I would like to thank you, the three of you, again, for your contribution for this dialogue here. I would like to thank Cristiano for bringing this perspective from the companies in Brazil, Julian for bringing your business understanding of this perspective as well, and Kat from the institutional side of King's College London, looking at COP26 and climate change among us. I think we had this perception, and also we could understand very well that when we talk about strategic communication, it will be not only with superficial image that we can pass this message that we are having here. But it's exactly what, again, as Cristiano says, with the embodiment of this transformation and with the understanding that we are part of this transformation as well. So in name of Brazil Institute at King's College London, I would like to thank you very much, to thank Aberje for this partnership, Sebastian for sharing also the screen with me here in these questions for you. And I will pass the word to Sebastian to his closing remarks. Thank you very much and hope to see you in our next episode.
Thank you, Vinicius. I think we've gathered some good steam around questions regarding climate change and added some flesh to the discussions and debate that will take place in Glasgow in November at the COP26 summit. The points were all very relevant and all helped us to delve into these matters. So I would like to thank again, Kat, Julian, Cristiano, thank you so much for your participation, for all the points that you brought to us. They were very enlightening, and I think they will be fundamental for the ongoing discussions after this seminar. Thank you very much, Vinicius, and everyone at the Brazil Institute in King's College, Danielle, everyone in Aberje, Victor, Hamilton, which made this event possible. And before closing, I would also like to thank all the institutions that supported this event, which are the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain, the British Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Brazil, the Canning House, the Brazilian Issues magazine, and the Brazil platform. I hope this event has been helpful, enlightening, and interesting for everyone. I'm sure it has. And I hope that we'll see you again in our next blended webinar series.